for right now, just put it on whatever you have, like syllabi.justin.hall or whoever's doing it. Just put it there.
Just we're going to Daniel Sonata.
Yeah. Here, maybe I can set up. But the other, do it on your own first, because then you'll get the full experience of setting it all up, and then we'll move it over, because I have to give you credentials for the S3 stuff and all kinds of things. I just don't feel like doing it at the moment. I do want to go see. We might own syllabi.
Yeah, better hop on Heroku and claim that one.
Yeah, we want to do it on AWS so we can manage it, but
are we deploying the backends to AWS?
yeah. Even with Heroku, that's all good. So what'll happen is you'll do a forward from the backend, which will probably be like api.syllabi.com to the Heroku generated URL that you get.
Okay. Yeah.
And then later we'll go through how to do that deployment through Kubernetes and like in our infrastructure. This t-shirt.
Really skimped on the insulation between floors in this building.
There's zero of it. It's just concrete block.
Which, when I don't like, it's been a while since I took a physics class, but sound should dampen a lot in concrete.
Not
right?
in concrete. Concrete amplifies.
Does it?
Dun, dun, dun. You need like air gaps to dampen sound. So it spreads, so it becomes more distorted. Concrete just is a medium for it to go straight through. Let's see, because I might have done it on my own. Because when it first started, there wasn't any. Yep. All right. So we have syllabi.com. It's just mine, so I have to transfer it. And then we might be able to. Where's the thing where I can create? Yeah. That's how it's spelled, right? SILLIBI.
Yes. Yeah. Let's just double check that.
That's a lot of eyes. It is.
Yeah, 2 L's. Justin, you missed a chance to sabotage the whole project by sitting on the domain.
Well, I already had syllabi.com in my personal account. It's just that we'd have to transfer it.
I could
And
have sold it for thousands of dollars.
That would have been totally on brand for you.
Yeah. I mean,
scorched earth.
yeah. I am the one who was trying to figure out how to pay interpreters less.
No, you're just always seeking out ways to like give passwords away,
Cheat people. Yeah.
delete GitHub repos.
All right. So instead of doing the deployment stuff today, what I want to do is look a little bit at some CSS things to make you guys aware of. We'll go over some things that are pretty simple, and you guys probably already know, and then we'll become more advanced into them. And then we'll go over Flexbox for a little while, which is useful. All right, so a couple things to be aware of. Maybe I'll pull this up here, CSS.
At some point, you sent a Flexbox like thing, like you put in like one of the things and it like shows you what it would look like.
Yep.
That is an excellent tool.
Okay, good. Let's do Dan usually has nicer things.
There's a call going on with Tony if you want to share your screen.
Oh, is he in Devon turns? Okay. I called him and he declined it. I didn't realize.
Although this is his bread and butter, so right? Doesn't do CSS.
Do you want to?
Leave.
Yeah, you leave the call. Still there, Tony?
Yeah, can you hear me?
It's also recording on OBS streaming, so you could do that. But
Does that end up being behind, or is it live time?
it's behind.
Okay.
Like
I'll
a couple
stay.
minutes. Yeah, stay here. I was just letting you know it's there. All right, so first things first, selectors. You guys are aware of some of these at least. So what's the class selector?
Dot
What's the ID selector?
hashtag.
How do I select all elements that have a particular name?
Asterisk.
So let's say I create a component that's called app dash card, right? I create a component called app dash card. How do I select it? Like maybe I want to put a border around my component.
Just say the name.
Yeah, you just say the name. It's just the actual element name. All right. What about if I wanted to get all of the input boxes that have a type equal to email?
I think you say input and then square brackets type equal, right? Or is that wrong?
Yeah. So you could do that. You can also. So yeah, let's go through that in just a second. Type equals email.
I need those quotes. Or no.
You might not need the quotes. It might be like that. I can't remember.
I don't think you need the quotes. No.
Yeah, you do. You have to put the quotes. All right. So there's type equals email, which you can do. What would this do? What's the difference between those two versions? So what's the difference between with input in front of it and without input in front of it?
With input, it's specifying only inputs.
Yeah. So with input is just an additional specifier saying only inputs with type equal. If you had another, like if you had a div that had type equal email, this would find that too. But if you put input in front of it, it would
So square brackets just indicate attributes. So
attribute. You see there's a couple other options up here. So you could do just attribute. So if they have the attribute at all with any value, you can do. So this one is starts with the value. So you can put type equals em, and it would find all the ones that have type equals email or type equals Emily. Some of these other ones I've never really used, but you can see there's a couple other options, right? So attribute or value, attribute star value. I don't know what all of those mean.
This has example in it somewhere. I think that one is.
Yeah, example is somewhere in it. That makes sense.
And $sign is by ending.
Dollar sign would be end, so that's consistent with like the regex stuff we started talking about. And then the approximate
Class attribute.
the word logo. Yeah, so it contains logo somewhere.
So I guess it's like doing a more
Lenient.
open, more lenient version of the hash.
Yep.
Hash.
Yep. So those are things that you have in your tool set. So that's all good. Understanding selectors is an important first step. Just gonna grab some paper towels off.
That's a good one. I like that image.
All right. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do CSS. One of which is in the file in line, which you guys have probably used. We use style. One is at the top of your file. Doesn't really apply so much in stencil. It's a weird thing. Nobody really does this anymore. But you could just directly have a style tag in your index.html. And then you can write your CSS inside of here and it'll apply globally. Or you can have it in a separate file, and what ends up happening in the case of stencil is all of the CSS files that you have, and you have that style URL that you put in, it brings all of them together, and then it drops them into a single file that gets included in your index.html using a style tag. So that's how that stuff gets in there. What's the difference between writing your CSS in file versus writing it inline in the code as a style?
When you do it on inline, you don't have to use any selectors or anything.
That's true, because you're directly on the thing. There's another thing that's important to know about using it in CSS versus using it in style.
Inline is more specific.
That's true, which means what?
It's more likely it overrides anything that happens
Yeah.
in the file.
That's the thing that's important. So style wins. Anything you put on the style tag overrides or wins against anything that's in the file, because it's more specific. It's as, and specific is the thing we're going to talk about in a second, it's as specific as it possibly can be because it's literally on the header. Okay. When you're writing CSS, you can also become more or less specific, okay? And it's mostly what you're going to think it is. So I can do div, and I can put some CSS inside here. This is going to find all of my divs. Okay? Let's say that I make the background color red. Alright. And over here we'll do our HTML. So let's see that I have a div. And I have another div with Evan, can you, let me point this at the screen. So. Alright, so I have a div that doesn't have any additional attributes, and I have a div that has an ID of blue. So if I do div background color red, what's my page going to look like?
They're both going to be red.
They're both going to be red. So now, if I do what's that going to do?
They're still both going to be red.
If I change this to blue.
The second one will be blue
Yeah, the second one's blue. Why is the second one blue?
because you specified that one with that ID
Yeah.
to be blue.
It goes back to your point. It's more specific. An ID is more specific than a general.
This order, so order doesn't matter here.
Or it doesn't matter.
So if you put the blue at the top.
Yep. Order does matter in CSS, but in this particular example, it wouldn't matter what order we put these things in. Where order matters is if you override the same rule, the second one wins. So if I had another one that goes like that, what does that do?
Then yeah, second one's blue. I mean,
Second-
they're all blue.
They're all blue.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So order matters, but only in that specific case. The rest of it is specificity.
So what about classes versus IDs?
Yeah, so
What are
classes.
dots and hashes?
So classes, that's fair. So I guess classes versus IDs. ID probably wins. I don't know. I'd have to look. ID should win given how IDs and classes are treated because IDs are supposed to be exactly one thing
Yeah.
and classes are multiple things. If you had a class versus a class thing, that's an interesting question. I guess order would probably matter there in the second one would win. So if you had class is blue and red, it might even matter what the order is in here. I'm not sure. We'd have to play around.
Okay.
Might even matter what's inside there. So like if I did red versus point here is if this is blue and then this is red, this has both of those classes. So which one are you going to get? The reason I don't know the answer to this is don't do that. Right?
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's an interesting, just like technical question. But don't do that. That's ridiculous. All right. It will happen sometimes though. Like where you're likely to run into that is in a scenario where you've written some code in Stencil where you're changing the class. So you want it to be red, but then when somebody clicks on it, you want it to be blue. And if you wrote your code in such a way that it just added the class, you would end up with both of them there, and you could get into a situation where it's not changing even though you think it should be. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there are bugs that you can run into. But the better way to do that is to remove the class and add the class, and then you don't have to worry about the problem. All right. So
I know there are. This is a little. Actually, I'll ask this later as you get deeper.
no, go ahead. What is it?
I know there are you can do style changes on hover.
Mhm.
Are there equivalent for clicks and other events in the CSS, or is hover special?
There's hover. They're on the side menu. There are certain things you can do. I don't remember off the top of my head. If we go. There's hover, active focus, focus within, and visited.
Okay.
So, which are basically just states of how you focus on that element. So, the most commonly used one is hover. Click doesn't work. Okay. So yeah, and the way if you wanted to do a hover, you would have something that's maybe red. Background color. Red, and then you have the dot red hover, where it might be background color blue. So if we did something like that, when we load the page, what is this div going to be?
It'll be red.
And then when I put my cursor over it, it's going to be blue. You can also, a lot of times with cursor, you want to do something like cursor pointer. You guys have any idea what that's going to do?
When you put your cursor over it, it changes.
Yeah, it changes
To
into
make it
the,
look clickable.
so it looks like a click.
Mario.
So that's a useful one. All right, so there's that. Now let's talk about an important one for you guys in Stencil. Namespacing. So we talk about the shadow DOM, and it's incredibly useful to keep yourself safe from other people changing the CSS globally using the shadow DOM. You don't have to worry about any CSS changes that other people are making. Your colors will be your colors no matter what because it's part of the shadow DOM and it's in that style, which is really they're doing an inline style right there, right before the thing, so it stays there all the time. We don't generally use the shadow DOM, right? We just allow it to inherit from the Ionic stuff, and that's totally fine. What that means, though, is you need some level of namespacing to keep your CSS from leaking out. And they actually might do some smart things. I haven't looked enough into Stencil in terms of that style URL piece, or they might still be sort of namespacing for you so it only applies to that component and doesn't leak out. We have to look at it, I'm not sure. But otherwise, in general frameworks, if you wanted to protect yourself, the easiest way to do that, like if you're doing React components or Angular components or whatever the case may be, is you can create a namespace by creating some level of specificity. And the way you would do that is, let's say you have an app card, and I just want to apply this style to any divs inside of my app card. You do it like this. So this says any children. So what the space means any children of app card. So any divs that are children of app card, I want to apply a background. So that's generally what you want to do when you're writing in these component worlds of React, Angular, Stencil. So it's just protected. Right.
What do you do if some components, like let's say app card, let's say it's an ion, like ion card, whatever, and they say we have a CSS variable of I don't know, border color. There, how do you pass in their variables, what they want
So
that they set up?
I forget. I'd have to look it up. If you want to use their variables, you do var and then the name of the variable. Primary.
Okay.
And if you want to define that variable as part of a style command, like in the JavaScript,
Yeah.
you just make the key the name of the variable. And then the value is whatever you want it to be.
Where is that going?
So if you were creating, this would be in,
Oh, you can do okay. Oh, in this okay. Like that, right?
like how you normally would do a style type. So you could then say, okay, basically anything underneath of this that's using that variable, I want to change it to be red. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
How you do that in the CSS, I've only done it like once, so I'm not 100%.
It's good. The more important one was for me was in the JavaScript.
Okay.
That's more where I need to.
Do you have a preference over using the component CSS style versus the Because you could really do it either way.
Yeah, so I think, I don't know, this is changing a lot. And so I don't think there's a very good best practice at this point.
Yeah.
The best practice used to be never put inline CSS.
Yeah.
Don't ever do that. You always want to move it out so that you can globally apply it and make changes, and it also helps with some separation of concerns. That you can think about your style separate from the functionality of the markup language. Now that we're working in this component world and everything's right there, and there's a very small set of style that you're doing, you're not trying to style the entire goal theme of the site, you're trying to style your component. There's like an easy debate that I haven't fallen on either side of yet, where putting the style directly in is more readable because you can actually see it. Whereas moving it out into another file is just like, it cleans up your code a little bit, but it also is like, it's the only thing that you're taking out. It used to be that you'd have an HTML file, a JavaScript file, and a CSS file. And the architecture for that was very strange too, because you'd have a CSS folder, a JavaScript folder, and a HTML folder. And then inside of there, you'd have a like message component CSS, message component JavaScript, message component HTML, and those things would work with each other. It's a huge pain logistically, but now it's all together. So I don't know.
Okay.
What I will say is, if you are trying to change it, like you want it to go from one color to another, that you should probably just do it in JavaScript because it's easier to make.
Yeah.
If it's, here's the other place where you probably want to use CSS file. If you're doing complicated CSS, so you're trying to do an animation, or you're trying to like do some absolute positioning or some floating or something where you're going to have like 10 lines of attributes that you're changing and modifying, those should probably be in the CSS file because it's just too complicated to do in the style type. But those things should become obvious. When we're just talking about changing the color of a div or whatever, I don't know that it matters all that much. All right. So there are several other selectors for you guys to be aware of, and you can use these in JavaScript. So you guys have you worked with the element stuff yet in JavaScript? So there's a at element. Okay. So what this does, what this syntax does, and you can look at the stencil docs a little bit more on it, it gives you a JavaScript selector for the component that you're currently working on. Okay, so this is like when we're in jQuery and you would do $, some ID, and that would give you back a component. This element, if you use it as a decorator at the top of the file, just like use state or any of those other things, it's going to give you back your current component that you're working on as an element. So it's like this equivalent. Okay. So then what you can do, you don't have jQuery, and you could install jQuery and use it, but you don't really need it anymore. What you can do then is you can say this, I'm just going to shorten this to be L, this dot L dot query selector. Hashtag some ID. This will look for any element inside of your component that has an ID of some ID, and then you can do whatever manipulation that you want to it. There's also selector all, which will give you back an array of all of the things that have like a class of some class. So then you can use that to iterate over things, like if you're in a list and you want to do some iteration over it. So all of these selectors are valid in this scenario as well, or in jQuery if you were to do that. There's lots of things that you can do in CSS, and it's worth just knowing that there are lots of ways of selecting things and getting very specific. So this is another option. Does anybody know what this CSS selector does?
So they have that parent child.
It's still parent-child. So this one is, what was this one again? What was it?
Child. All children.
All children.
So that's just first child.
First child. Yeah. You can also do first. I'll also give you the first one of them. You can do. I know what that does. That says, I want any sibling of app card that is a div. So that would be like if this was app card. Then that div will be colored. So there's a whole bunch of these types of selectors that you can use to get very specific about the thing that you're selecting. I'm just bringing this up so that you know what you're looking for. One important thing about CSS, what does CSS stand for?
Cascading style sheets.
What does that mean?
That's the whole thing. That's the whole layering thing. That's
Organized.
where if it's under, that means it's overriding anything that's above.
Yeah,
I
that's
feel
part
like-
of it.
I think that's
It also, the way CSS processes the file, it always goes down.
Mhm.
So if I wanted to get the parent of app card, how would I do that?
get the. Is there? I don't know what
You can't.
Oh, you can't.
Alright.
Yeah.
You can't select.
You can't go up the DOM. You can only go down the DOM. It's a performance thing. They might have, I mean, the last time I looked at this, they were trying to solve that problem. And that was a few years ago now, so it's possible that there's a CSS parent selector now. But originally there was not. What does it say? It's almost fun. Yeah. So yes, the syntax corrected. Yeah, they're huge ones. So I don't know. I'm pretty sure that's still the state of things. And it generally doesn't matter, especially for you guys, because you're working in the component world. So you can always start at the top because you know what your component is, and then you can go down from there. I'm just trying to explain, like there are all kinds of other selectors where you can get siblings or first child or last child or like the children that have a sibling, right? Like you can go and get very specific like that. You can say any children of mine that have a sibling of div that are also the child of another thing and have a class, right? Like you can get super specific like that. But the one thing that you can never do is go up. You can't say have a parent.
So, like if you just do like across the whole document, the thing that has a child named exactly this.
Across. Say that one more time.
So like if you wanted to get the parent of that, and for whatever reason maybe that parent was going to change, you wanted to apply to all parents of that.
Yeah.
Could you say like across the document, everything that has a child that is app card legally div?
No. You couldn't affect their style as being a parent of something.
Okay.
You would have to put an ID on them.
Gotcha.
So you can do this in JavaScript, but it's the same performance issues happen because JavaScript, the DOM manipulation also goes down the DOM. So what you can do is iterate down the DOM, and for each div, check to see what its child information is, and then keep it if it has a child. But you have to start from the top and iterate down, so it's a big performance cost. And so for every div, you're checking to see what its child is. So for every DOM element that exists, you have to process some code, which as you get to a large page, that becomes a problem, especially if it's like on a click you're doing that or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's kind of sucks, but it's just the way that the DOM works. And honestly, it's even just the way that the DOM is constructed in its essence, because it starts with HTML and then it goes in and in and in and in and in. It's all nested. It's just a bunch of nested arrays. And so you have to follow the decision tree down. You can't, there's no way to like flatten it so that it's a single array that you just drop down. Does that make sense?
Also, can you do like complex relationships between, like I want this div to always be the same size as this div? Or is that just something that's like, or I want it to be half the size of this? Or can you even do like almost like, I know in some other design concepts, you can do almost like anchors. Like I always want this to be next to this no matter, or like those type of things, relationships between two different objects, or is that
not in the way you're thinking about it. You can accomplish that.
Yeah, like
but you would do it with. So we'll talk about Flexbox, which will solve some of the problems that you might be talking about. But generally speaking, it's that the easiest way to do this now with CSS is you create a CSS variable that's like, if you were trying to make one thing dependent on the width of another thing, you make the variable be a width, and then you do a calc, so you can do calculations that say 50% of whatever that variable was. So times 0.5. So like if it was that thing is, so the first div is 80 view width, right? Then the second calculation that happens would be half of 80 view width, which is 40 view width, which is going to make it always be proportionally smaller than the other. If you wanted to do something more complicated than that with calc, you might be able to do some like exponential type calculations. I'm not sure. I haven't done anything other than division and multiplication and addition and subtraction before. So that's generally how you would set something like that up. But you can't just say, I want you to just reference this other thing, and then based on its width, I want you to be this thing. You have to have a variable that you share between the two of them. That makes sense? You can in JavaScript, because in JavaScript you could go find the first element and then get its width, but like that information exists on the JavaScript element that you get back, and then you could use that variable to set the style of the other thing. But you can't do that in CSS. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Like what I was thinking about is like you have, say you have like a because maybe it doesn't always work. Okay, say you have 3 divs.
Mm-hmm.
You have a div on top that size is fixed. Let's say it's like 50. Then you have a div in the middle, or you can even just draw squares. Yeah. You have a div on top that's 50. The div in the middle is like flexible, and then there's a div on the bottom that can either be like 50 or 0, or maybe even something in between. But you just want the div in the middle to always take up the space in between to fill it up.
Yes.
So is that
So Flexbox will help with that.
okay?
Yeah. So you're saying like you like here you want the third div no matter what the size of
Yeah,
these
no
things
matter
are.
what that is, fill up the space.
Yeah, so if this was like, let's say that this is always 20% and this is sometimes 50 pixels and sometimes 30%, and you just want no matter what this is for this to be to
Yeah,
fill in the space.
because right now I have to do like sometimes like JavaScript, wait for like listen for resize or
Yeah.
like really have to.
So this is where Flexbox comes in. Flexbox is genius creation. You have no idea how many problems existed before Flexbox. Some of them go to what you're saying, which is actually a more complicated case. Some of the big things that I could never solve are like, if you did that, and then you had that's not great, right? What's happening is the height of these guys are making the containing div tall, but because of the way that HTML renders, this guy sticks to the top because it's small. I don't want that. I want it to drop into the middle. And it's just a nicer looking thing. The way that you used to have to do that was with the vertical alignment or with some sort of position absolute. Very complicated things just to get the thing to go into the middle of the page. And vertical align just never really worked. So Flexbox is all first for me, that problem, and then so many others. So we'll look. This is not the one I want.
The 5th search result is a game for learning CSS Flexbox. Flexbox Froggy.
This one?
I'm not recommending it. I don't know why I just downloaded
We'll find
something.
out. Oh, that's interesting.
Hope that you've pushed whatever you need to have. Oh, I like that I can see it.
Oh, now you like things that you can see.
Yeah. Now you like
I like Rails because I don't have to see anything. But if I have to look at it, I want to see what all of the things I'm doing are doing.
You want me to literally do this?
Just walks you through it step by step.
Yeah.
It's cool.
So the space between forces them to stay apart from one another. Center moves them close to each other. Space around moves them apart from each other, but equally apart from the side of the page. See that? Flex end moves them to the end. Center moves closer together. Yeah. So that's just the justify content piece. So generally speaking, when you're trying to like position things, both in terms of columns and get nice spacing, and in terms of rows and get nice spacing, Flexbox is where you want to go. So we'll walk through some of the things that it can
And
do.
it maintains on resize.
Mm-hmm. Yep. All right.
It's all the angle of
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can put it where it needs to be, but I don't want to be the one to handle.
I saw the
Yeah,
bunch of
this move
the
here.
bunch of JavaScript stuff checking to see this bit in the page.
Yeah, that's because that's what they had to do at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what it has to be until you learn. Yeah, you hack it together until you have a better option. Yeah, so first thing to understand with Flexbox is that there's a container and then there's the item. So you can think of the container as your row or as your column, and then the items are each div that's inside of that row or column. So the first thing you have to do to use Flex is the container has to have a display flex so that it knows that it should start applying these other flex type things to it. Actually, I'm not 100% sure why that's necessary, but it is. Then you can look at flex direction. So this allows you to reverse the order of things if you want to. This can become particularly useful. This was a way. I don't remember if that's how I ended up, but a way that I was doing messaging at one point. So when you type a message, you don't want the default flex direction. So normally everything goes from the top to the bottom. What we want is everything to go from the bottom to the top. So when you type in a new message, it actually pushes up instead of down. If that makes sense. So you can change the flex direction. You can say reverse, and it'll move you in the opposite direction. Flex direction is also important to determine whether what you're trying to do your spacing against is in a row. So am I trying to spread things horizontally, or am I trying to spread things vertically? Flex direction also forces the way that the divs run. So that was another thing that we had early on. This is one of the simple problems that it fixes. So if I put two divs, if I do div and then a div, what is that going to look like on my screen? Are they going to be next to each other, or are they going to be on top of each other?
Next to each other. Oh no, on top of each other.
On top of each other. But a lot of the times when I'm trying to create a row, I want them to be next to each other, right? So to do that, you have to use flex direction row, okay, which is actually the default when you use flex. But you see what's happening is you're going from the default HTML behavior where div goes on top of div, and what you're doing is moving things next to each other. If you say column, then it'll go back to the default, which is div on top of div.
And that's all in the container element.
This is all in the container element. Yeah, so everything on the left over here, we're defining on the container element. So it's saying, I want all of my children to be in a row, or I want all of my children to be in a column, or I want all of my children to be the opposite of what you would normally say.
So when you say opposite, it's in the reverse order.
It's the reverse order. So if you did
So
row
the second
reverse,
one that you put
would be the
is-
first one.
Okay.
Same thing with column, so it would go in the opposite direction. Okay. Flex wrap is useful for allowing it to just fall down. So this is nice for like when you're creating a bunch of cards, and you've seen more and more of this. It just helps a lot for different screen sizes. So if you use flex wrap and you say wrap, what will happen is as I go from a desktop to a mobile device, it'll just auto wrap the things down where it makes sense. So you don't have to do all of your media queries and stuff. You can just let it go, which is really nice. Which is why you see more cards being used in websites and stuff today. It's because when they go to mobile, they can just call flex wrap, and the things go from being 3 next to each other to being 1 next to each other, and they didn't have to do very much work to get there. I don't know what this is. This is a short name for the flex direction, flex wrap properties. You can do them together. So you can say flex flow row no wrap, or flex flow column wrap, or flex flow row reverse. It's just putting both of them into a single command. See what I'm saying? It's just shorthand. All right. Next piece is, so now that we have our items flowing in a particular direction, we now want to say how we want to separate our items from each other and from the sides of the screen. So flex start keeps everything. This is the normal behavior that you see on the web. Everything just stays next to each other. Flex end pushes everything to the end of the container. An important thing where you're using Flexbox is you need to make sure that your width of your container is a size that you think it should be. So if your flex container happened to be only 20% of the screen, and you do flex end and flex start, you're not going to see any differences. Nothing's going to happen, right? Because it's just taking up the containing width, and so there's nowhere for them to move. They're at the end of the start, but you can't tell. So you need to make sure that the width is actually the full width of the screen to be able to get what you want out of it. There's center. We went through all of these, right? Space between, space around, space evenly. I think the difference between space around and space evenly is evenly actually does a better job of keeping the space from the side. Space around probably just has some amount of padding, and then the real spacing is happening between the items. It should tell us that in here. Distributed so the spacing between any two items and the spaces to the edge is equal. Yeah. Items are evenly distributed in the line with equal space around them. Oh, I see. So it's all the way around on both sides. They all have equal space on both sides. Space evenly makes sure that they're actually distributed from the sides in the same way that they're distributed from each other. And then you can do a line item. So all of these examples are for a row, but you can imagine what they would do if you had done column. So if you change the flex direction to be column, it's not going to work on the TV, but you just do this, right? And it's the same concept. All right, so if we get down to align items, so what this is going to do is now we've got the row, we've got them separated the way that we want to. Flex start is the default behavior that you would see in a row. Everything is stuck to the top, and so the height of the highest one is going to determine how high the container is, and they're all stuck to the top. Flex end pushes them all down to the bottom. Center keeps them all centered. That's what you use a lot of the time. Stretch ensures that they all get the same height as the largest one. And what that'll do is like force, if you have a smaller thing, you'll maybe end up with some extra space at the bottom, or whatever the case may be. It's just forcing height. And then baseline is just lining up against wherever, I guess, the first set of text is, and keeping all of those things straight, even though other things might be higher or lower. So this might be like if you had cards that had a header, and then they have varying amounts of content underneath of them. Baseline might be a good one to use. Yeah, aligned content is how you want to keep your entire set of things. This becomes particularly important once flex wrap is turned on and things are falling over. How do you want them to display? So most of the time you are just going to use flex start. They all just stay up at the top when they wrap, but it's possible that as they're wrapping, what you really want is them to build up from the bottom, or you want to, maybe you have a really large screen and you just want to take up the full set of the screen, so we're going to space it out. Stretch makes every div the height.
The on the next one.
There's stretch. Oh, it's ensuring it's the same concept. So every div takes up the height of the maximum div. See what I'm saying? So let's talk about it in terms of this. So let's talk about it in terms of this simpler example, which is just the row first. All right, so imagine that I have a card that looks like this because it just has a bunch of content. I have another card that looks like this. I have another card that looks like this. And then I have a card that looks like this, right? And it's just because this has some small amount of text, this has lots of text, this has a picture and some text, this has an icon. What stretch does is it says, I get they're all different sizes and different content, which causes them to use up different amounts of the screen, but I want them to all look like they're in a row all the way across and consistently. Maybe I'm going to put a border around it or something. What it says is, okay, make all of these guys take up the entire space, or another way of putting that is make it as large as the largest one. Does that make sense?
Okay, but so that's the same stretch.
It's the same concept. So this is for a row. Now imagine that they start to wrap. So now we've got so we've reached the end of our page that way. So now we come down here, and what we're going to have is another card that looks like this. I'm going to have a card that looks like this. I'm going to have a card that looks like this. Right, so this is the second row. So first row, one through small, second row, go through small. Okay. What we want to do is we want to make it look like a consistent thing. Like this is all hodgepodge and craps all over the place, and some things are small and large. And I want it to look like a consistent, we're all the same size thing, even though the content doesn't make us larger or smaller. So what stretch would do in that case is it would make it so that, again, they're the same size as the largest one, so that it looks like you've got a nice consistent size to all of your divs.
Nice. No less.
What's
Sorry.
that?
The less rows that you have, the more it stretches vertically.
The less rows you have.
Right, because that's wrapping down.
Yeah.
If you took out 4 of those cards and said, and now it's like, oh, there's only one row, we're just going to stretch vertically more.
No.
Yes, but dependent on what the largest guy is.
So no. I think with what you're saying. Hold on. So
Mm-hmm.
if we got rid of these 4 cards,
yeah,
our container becomes only this big.
I get what you're saying.
See what I'm saying?
Good.
What if
So-
you set the container height to like a certain-
Yeah, so if you set the container height to be large and you only had 1 row and you had the content stretch, I don't know what content stretch would do. I think it would keep you, it might pull you all the way down. I don't know. You have to try it. Stretch would certainly, if you set the container height to be something, stretch would certainly cause it to go all the way down. I'm not sure about the aligned content if that would also stretch it. Maybe. There's a good chance. All right, so that's the container side of things. Then within the container, you can also do things to the items. So one thing you can do is you can set the order property for each of the items. What the advantage of that is when things start to wrap, they here, yeah. If all flex items are laid out in a source order, however, the order property controls the order in which they appear in the flex container. So what this is going to do is the higher numbered things are going to go towards the end. So if you want to put something in a specific position in a list, you can solve that with flex order. You're probably never going to do this. Why would you not use this? So imagine, so generally this is a list of things, right, that you're displaying on the screen. How do we normally do that in Stencil?
You just have an array.
You have an array. So if you wanted to order the array in a specific way, how would you do that?
You just change the order.
You just change the order of the array.
So is this accessing the content of the elements or like an ID?
So this is just, this is saying any div that has a class of item, make its order 1, 0, 2,
okay.
3, whatever. And then, so like some of these, so in this case, if it was order 1, that would suggest that these 3 divs have a class of item. And then you might have another class called item second and have an order of 2, and that would be this one, and then another one that has item class of 3. And what the advantage of that is if you displayed them on the screen through your JavaScript in the wrong order, they would get reordered correctly.
Okay.
But there's not much advantage to us in that because you would just write JavaScript. This is really for like people who are very UX heavy and they don't know any other way to do that. Flex grow is what you were trying to get at. So what this allows for is saying, I want each thing in here to be set to 1, and then anything that doesn't have that class on it to just be allowed to grow to take up whatever extra space there is. So in this case, this one and this one have a class of item, and they've been given a flex grow of 1. This one doesn't have that class, and so it just takes over whatever space is left over.
So it's only working with 1s and 2s?
Well, it just happens to be 2. So that you could not put anything, and it will just grow to be whatever the size of the thing is. So this one is allowing it to grow to 2. Yeah, it takes up twice as much space. So this is being like double the size, but you can leave it as, it's either the default, I'm pretty sure it's the default, is if you don't put anything here, it's just going to expand to be whatever the leftover space is. In this case, they're putting a specific number, saying like, I want this thing to be twice as big as these 2 things. Flex shrink defines the ability for a flex item to shrink if necessary. Same concept, just in the opposite direction. Flex basis, I don't know what this is. This defines the default size of an element before remaining space is distributed. It can be a length or a keyword. Give my width or height property. It's size of based on the item's content. No, it's also not well stored yet. We're just going to skip. I don't know what this is. Let's see. That doesn't help me at all.
It's pretty complex.
Yeah. So then flex is just a shorthand to be able to do all those commands together. Align self is sometimes useful. So this is, you have a flex start set up for your container, but then you want a specific item to go to the bottom, so you can call flex end on it. So this is, there's some places where you might actually use that. So let's see, so an example of that might be, actually this happens pretty poorly. The heck? This is working great. What is the thing I did? Oh, I'm in incognito. So here, this is a great example of where we probably should be using align self end and we're not. See how this is growing? See how the send button is staying centered? We probably don't want that. We probably want to leave it down here. So you could use align self end and that would cause it to go down even though we're keeping the text area centered. Cool. I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, so hopefully that's useful, gives you some direction. Now, when you use this in Stencil or the Ionic component, you're not typically, I mean, you could totally write your own CSS to do it, but with the Ion Grid stuff, they have a lot of this built in for you, and so you just look at their documentation to do essentially the same thing. But this should help, like when they have, because they have an attribute that's like justify-content-space-around or whatever, and you do that instead of doing a justify content :space around. But it should help you to understand like what am I trying to do. Does that make sense? Grid goes further than that, and there's a new concept of grid. It's. I mean, if you think Flexbox is complicated, don't even look at this yet. But grid allows you to do stuff like this, where and it becomes particularly useful when you start to add in screen size. So at certain screen sizes, I might want like a hodgepodge of like pictures. I know that some pictures are going to be 4 times the size of some other ones, so I'm going to take 2 half-size ones and put them next to a full four-sized one. And then when I get to a smaller screen size, I actually want to like move them underneath of each other or whatever, right? The grid allows you to do more of that like sizing of particular items in a row and putting the right ones next to each other. But it's a little nuts. And there's not a lot of scenarios for this. This is like if you were building Pinterest. I don't really like
Anything with like a mosaic.
yeah, like a mosaic type
Yeah.
deal. I don't know how to spell Pinterest. I probably do.
I have one. You know, log in once in 2011. But for some reason, if you Google my name, it'll
No,
come.
yeah, nobody's judging you, Ashley. I'm glad you like Pinterest.
What do you use it for?
Everything.
Cooking ideas, home improvement,
Cooking,
inspiration.
knickknacks.
I use it to find my computer.
Oh, nice.
Oh,
Yeah, like you can even see it already happening. Yeah, like this. Right? It's very difficult to be able to do things that are this size and this size and this size and all these different sizes and make it look like it's taking up the entire screen. Like I mean, imagine trying to create the row, right? Like this guy goes down to here, and then this guy is on a different row than that guy. So how do I do this?
so you can't do that with just Flexbox.
Can't do it.
Okay.
What you could do with Flexbox is you could do all of these guys on this row, stretch, and then you could even just wrap after that. So you could say stretch, and they'd all be this size, and then the next row would start with this one, and then this one, and then this one, and this one, and they would stretch.
Right, and then they'd all be the same height.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be less,
It'd be less
visually
this.
interesting.
Yeah.
Or chaotic.
Yeah.
depending on-
Yeah. But to make this work without the spaces and stuff, you need grid, which is why that exists. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But also, like, you don't need to make crazy things like this. You can.
But this is
And it's a lot. Like, people are moving away from this type of thing just because it's like, it's hard to look. There's so many things.
I feel like ad agencies like to have websites that look like this.
Well, they want to have their ads. Because they're trying to throw everybody's brand up in
Yeah.
front of your face. But when you're building tools that people are like using to get things done functionally,
Yeah.
this is not necessarily the best design practice. Pinterest, it's fun. It's whatever because it's just people are scrolling to find stuff. But yeah, anyway. There's another tattoo for you, actually. All right. Generally, very useful. You guys have a little better understanding. At least now you know where to go look at Flexbox, and hopefully you can read it a little bit better and exposed to it a little more.
That's great. Just as an aside, some of my apps